it's all good. Happy Monday. Our goal for today is to explain the changing role of women during the 1960s. So we're going to take a look at women in the 1960s. I meant to have you do a Google Classroom question. How would you describe a feminist? But I didn't. So we'll just, because I forgot to put it in. I mean, I guess I could do it right now, but that's... I got it. I want you to think in your heads right now, not about Fortnite, but about women of the 1950s. How would you describe a feminist? Just kind of get a couple of quick thoughts. We're going to take a poll. I know we haven't done one of these in a while, right? Are you a feminist? No. I'm a boy. That wasn't the question. I didn't ask your gender. I asked, are you a feminist? Well, that's why you had to define. That's why it helped to think about what you meant when you said you were a feminist. Hold on, we'll have this. Everybody done voting? Do we need more time? And then we'll actually, because I think we're about to have that discussion. All right, everybody good? Raise your hand if you're not good. Okay, everybody's good. So 68% of you are not feminists. 32% of you are. Maddie, you were on the verge of saying something about feminists. You're debating this.
I was thinking no, like I don't know, because I put yes, but I was kind of thinking no because like today's standards are different. Because they're like some feminists are kind of extreme, like the ones that like get media coverage are like extreme. So I'm not like extreme to that point, but like I believe in like rights for women.
Okay, good. Other people, thoughts?
The actual like definition of feminism is equal rights for both all genders and stuff, but like modern day feminism is far from that because there's like so many like just extremist, others going like way extreme on it. So like it's really kind of like definition of that.
Okay. I could see your sister pounding that into your head.
Yeah.
Well, like kind of like going on with Corey said, a lot of people claim to be feminists, but they don't want it to be equal. They want to like get rights, but they don't want the rights to be equal for men and women. They want women to be pregnant.
Good. Other thoughts? Thoughts on feminism? Rebecca, were you on the verge of something before we? You looked like you were close to having a thought. Other people? Thoughts? Anybody on the verge of a thought want to share with them? What do you think of when you hear the term feminist? I mean, some of you have already said.
People marching on the streets claiming they have no rights and saying they want more rights. I don't think that's kind of annoying. It's like you do have rights, you just claim that you don't. So
Good.
That's my
Good. I think that's a good description of a lot of feminists.
My thing is there's some countries out there that they don't have rights. So my thing is they should help those countries and those make have a good amount of rights here and most be equal. But there's some countries and other places where they don't have the rights. And I think they need to push that more.
Good. Excellent. Other thoughts on feminism? I mean, what do you think of when you think the term feminist? Generally speaking, is feminist a negative or a negative connotation or a positive connotation? How many of you think it's positive? How many of you think it's negative? How many of you don't think? Okay. Hey, at least a few of you are being honest. Get the feminist siren there going on. So I I think a lot of times when we think feminists, we think this, right? Yelling and screaming and give me rights and this crazy psycho sort of portrayal or image of women. And I think that's pretty inaccurate. I will tell you 100%, I am a feminist, but I am not that. I mean, well, first of all, I'm not a woman. And second of all, I'm not like crazy psycho screaming it in your face. And I think a lot of times when we think the term feminist, we think crazy psycho in your face. You okay? The more I study, the more I realize how little I know. Well, how about we get a new chair and hopefully you're okay.
Sit down in a certain way, so it's like a chair.
We can just throw it away eventually. I was gonna say we've got a new door. I'll just throw it over there somewhere. I'll get rid of it later.
Chair, obviously. No, you're in your driver's seat, obviously.
All right, back to feminism. I think oftentimes in our world today, feminism has a negative connotation, and so even though most of you in this room probably truly are feminists, many of you, even the ladies in this room, sort of hesitate to go along with yeah, I'm a feminist, because it's sort of in our world today, unless you are a feminist, a lot of times, well, unless you are sort of the loud in your face feminist type, it really has sort of this negative connotation to it. And as Corey pointed out, man, your sister, she schooled you pretty well. Feminism is a belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. A belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. I believe that men and women should be equal. I'm a feminist. How many of you believe men and women should be equal? Wow. Gentlemen, you're starting to learn. Usually there's always like 2 or 3 guys who's like, no, I'm superior, and it's like, and you're never going to get a date either. So have fun with that one. But you guys all get it, right? So this idea that women should be equal, that there should be equality in society, is really truly what we mean by feminism. And yes, some people who when we look at the local media, when we look at the national media, when they show women protesting, they often, unfortunately, pick sort of the wrong clips of women. Instead of picking a clip of the normal sane woman who's like, yeah, I want equal rights, and I'm here for equal rights, they usually try to find the loudest, most in-your-face kind of person, because that makes news, that sells advertisements, that sells commercials, that makes money for the media. And are those women who are very loud and in your face with feminism, are they wrong? Most of the time, no. I mean, I don't know, if I had been oppressed for the last 1,000 years of human history, and if I made less money than somebody else for doing the exact same job, I'd be pretty ticked off too. Ladies, on average, even though it's against the law today, on average, you make roughly 20 cents per hour less, 20% per hour less than men for doing the same amount of work and the same job. Now, technically speaking, you can't discriminate against women like that. But what usually ends up happening is companies will find some way to justify paying men more than women. And I don't know, if I were a woman in that situation, maybe I would be very loud and screaming and in your face if I'm working and I'm getting paid 20% less than a man. So I think as we go through the world of feminism today, and as we start to talk about some of the things that make feminism possible and some of the traits of feminists in the 1960s, keep in mind that what we're going to look at is probably at least some of the people who are just not happy with life, and not because they're not happy with themselves, but they're not happy with their situation. Much like African Americans wanted to stand up in the nobody's respecting you for who you are and the way you are, whether it be because of your gender or your race or your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, suddenly you're going to become angered. And I think those angered people are the empowered people. They're the ones who are going to bring about change. Unfortunately, for whatever reason throughout our history, feminism has become associated as almost a negative thing, right? I mean, even most women in this room are like, I don't know if I'm a feminist. I mean, you are by definition, but sort of for whatever reason, the media has given feminism sort of a negative name, a negative connotation, and so we sort of look down upon it, and really we shouldn't. We should be embracing the idea of feminism. We should be embracing the idea of equality for all genders. And when we talk about equality, the three that we've already mentioned in the definition: social, economic, and political. So economic, obviously, meaning equal pay, equal benefits for the same work. Social, let's treat women equal in society. And then finally, political. Women should have an equal opportunity to win public office, to participate in the government. And that's something that women, for much of our history, have not had. Now, I think Ethan is onto something when he says, well, yeah, maybe we should focus on other countries too, right? Because other countries, there really is. I mean, we're not 100% equal in America, unfortunately, but we're fairly close to being there. There are a lot of countries in the world where it's night and day. I mean, women don't have rights in some other countries, and certainly maybe a lot of attention needs to be focused on those countries too. But we're in U.S. history class, so we're going to look at the 1960s and 1970s in world history. So this is women in Congress. Keep in mind, women make up 51% of the American population. They currently, as of this year, only make up 17% of the Congress. 51% of the population, only 17% of Congress. If we look at the number of women senators and the number of women representatives in the House of Representatives, the number has grown significantly since 1917, since women were given the right to vote. But still, given there are currently 535 members of Congress, and only roughly under 100 of them are women. Well, roughly 50% of the American population is female. I mean, this is showing you not only do we not have equality, but we're far ways off.
Could that be because they don't run, or do they just not get voted? Because it obviously shows that it's not equal. But I want to know like who is running for the Senate and House of Representatives, because if they're not running, then obviously they can't get voted in.
It's a trickier question than who runs and who doesn't, because in order to run, you need money, you need funding, and you get that from one of the two major political parties, generally speaking, or you get that from donations, which oftentimes comes from private business. So if women want to run but they don't have the money to run, they've got to rely on the political party, or they've got to rely on business donations. And so it's not as easy as just saying, did a woman run? I mean, so like I want to run for Congress. I'm not a woman, but I want to run for Congress, but I don't have the money to do it. So if I wanted to run, I would have to convince one of the political parties to give me money, or I'd have to convince a lot of donors to give me money. And if you're a woman, that's harder to do, because a lot of times women are not given an equal opportunity. As far as women running and winning, there still is a great, and I don't know the exact statistic, but when women run against men, men are significantly more likely to win. You're right. It's not 50% of women are running in elections, but when women do run, I can't remember the exact number, but it's a significant number who run end up losing their election. That's a great point.
But also, like, have they like given like if the candidate is actually like a good enough, if she got voted out and say the man won, did he deserve to win, or like because I'm guessing right nowadays if you look at all of the like elections that they had going on with that, you would be able to tell just by with their facts and everything would be the better candidate.
like, do you know if most of the women who did get it would have won or should have won, or?
It's hard to say who should have or would have or could have won, because a lot of it has to do with your political perspective. Um, if we look at the highest level of office, should Hillary Clinton have won? I mean, I'll let you decide that. When Sarah Palin was running for vice president back in the day, should she have won? I'll let you decide that. I'm not here. I can't make political statements as to who I think should have won or would have been the best candidate. But we can assume that if you're running for office, I guess the tricky thing with, and again, your perspective is well taken. It's like saying, well, we only hire white people because they're more qualified than African Americans, and if we could find a more qualified African American, we'd hire them. The question is, are you looking for qualified African Americans? Are you looking for qualified Latinos? Are you looking for qualified women? Or do you just automatically find that as a way to justify why you didn't vote for somebody? I know straight up, I know people who flat out said that in the last election they would not vote for Hillary Clinton simply because she wasn't one. No, that's not a lot of people, but there are plenty of people out there who have that belief. All politics aside, that was the prevailing point of view. Just like I know plenty of people, unfortunately, who when Barack Obama was running, who said, "I won't vote for him because he's a black guy." Had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with qualifications, nothing to do with political beliefs. Just straight up, that's why I'm not voting for that person. And so it becomes, again, a really tricky question. And actually, I'm glad you guys were thinking about this and analyzing it. Let's take a look at analyzing. Yep. Analyzing. Did I make up my own words? Right? What are some other ones? Efforting, or efforting to get something done. I didn't make that one up. I stole it from somebody else. Issues. Anyways, back to the idea of women. So one of the earliest household name feminists, and again, there are plenty of people who are feminists, plenty of people who believe in equal rights for women, going back to even the 1700s, 1800s. Throughout our nation's history, we've had many people who have called for equal rights for women. But one of the early feminists who really starts to get a lot of attention is a lady named Betty Friedan. And Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. You might be familiar with it because last unit, when we read readings from women in the 1950s, one of the sections we one of the sections we read was Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, where she's arguing for women to try to earn equal rights as men, try to win equal rights as men. And so if we look at The Feminine Mystique, she was the one who said that women live boring lives in houses. The housewife, the house mom, the person who is just there to cook and clean all day, that's boring. And Betty Friedan said, I don't want to be that woman. I don't want to just sit around and cook and clean all day. There's more to life than this. I want to do more with my life. And so Betty Friedan is really, in her book, The Feminine Mystique, one of the first people to really draw a lot of national attention to the idea of women are sick of this house mom, clean up, vacuum the house, cook dinner, wait on the man handed foot kind of thing. And especially, again, we've mentioned after World War I and World War II, when women got into the factories, when they earned their own money, when they started supporting themselves, it became like, oh, hey, I don't need to rely on men. I don't need to do this stuff. I want to go out and I want to earn money on my own. I don't need to rely on a man to take care of me. And so Betty Friedan really starts to bring to light and really unify more and more women, not everybody, of course, but she starts to unify more people off of the idea that, hey, we're tired of being boring housewives. We're tired of just waiting on men hand and foot. And let's try something new. Let's try something different. So if we want to think about some other things that may lead us to believe that women where women stand as far as the world goes. In the 1960s, women make up 30 to 40% of the workforce. I'll never ask you to memorize a statistic. But usually the types of jobs that women are doing are lower paid jobs. They're the very menial level jobs. They're what we would today call maybe entry level jobs or just above entry level jobs. When men are the managers, women are the ones working in the factories. When men are owning businesses and companies, women are doing secretarial work. Women are doing the jobs that generally pay less than men. So even though we see the rise in the labor force over the years, the median income, to take the bottom, chop off the top and bottom, and look at the dead center. The median income for men and women in 1950, women were making $953, men making $2,570 in 1950. You can see that by 2000 things get a little bit more equal. Back then, the number looks like so if we want to do the translation, 9,886 to $26,000.
I feel like the average would be a better representation.
Averages generally tend to not be as accurate as median. So averages take into account the highest and the lowest, and when you take into account the highest and the lowest, you don't really get an accurate number. So
Like on top of the median, then we should also have the range.
we should. This is your book came up with the graph, not me. But if you want to think about averages, just take a two-person average. So if you make $8 an hour and Bill Gates makes $1 million an hour, we make an average of $500,000, right? But most of society is nowhere near that.
The median of two people is the average.
Well, yes, but there's moving. Like this with your math teacher. That's what your book shows. It's more accurate. Anyway, so women in the civil rights movement. If we look at the civil rights movement, the African American civil rights movement, a lot of women were really actively involved in helping African Americans fight for their rights, and not just African American women, but a lot of white women jumped on board with that too, because they saw this as an opportunity to truly bring about equality and justice in society. A lot of white women realized if we can win equal rights for African Americans, then we can win rights for white women as well, for African American women, for all women. As we look at oppressed people in society, a lot of women jumped on board and said, yeah, I know the feeling of oppression. I know what it's like to get paid less money. I know what it's like to have the crummy jobs. I know what it's like to be looked down upon by society. And so a lot of women jumped on board with the civil rights movement. And when they started to see the success of the civil rights movement, they start to pick up confidence and start to raise more consciousness about the women's rights movement and about equality for women. And so after we see the success in the civil rights movement, many women say, you know what, that worked. Brown versus the Board of Education, Union Court cases, it worked. Protests worked. Peaceful protests worked. Now it's the time for women to succeed. It's the time for women to fight for their own rights. And so a lot of what we see in the civil rights movement helps to inspire the women's rights movement. So one of the strategies during the civil rights movement was to form groups like the NAACP, CORE, and SNCC, those groups that help to fight for civil rights. Women start to form their own organizations as well to fight for women's rights. One of the most prominent organizations that's still around today now, the National Organization for Women. And one of the things that NOW wanted was child care facilities. A lot of people say that one of the things that puts women at a huge disadvantage is the fact that women are the ones who make babies, and at the end of the day, women are the ones who, generally speaking, in sort of most of the understood world, especially in the 1960s, were the ones who stayed home to take care of the kids. And it's very difficult to have a job and have kids at the same time. To take care of your kids, if you've got to pay for daycare, and if you can't afford daycare, well then you're kind of stuck doing whatever job will work around your schedule. Most high-paying jobs are not going to work around your schedule, and so women, one of the systemic things that leads to this inequality between men and women is just simply put the fact that women have to take care of the children, and so the idea of creating childcare facilities, if you've got somebody to look over your kids, if you've got somebody to watch your kids, then you can go out and you can get a good high-paying job during the day. You can go out and get the education you need to get a high-paying job. So those things that are built into the system that sort of hold women down, it's just like some of the things that were holding African Americans down during the civil rights movement. Many African Americans couldn't afford an education because in the earliest days, remember, most African Americans in our country were slaves, and slavery is over. Well, those people are still the lowest income in society. Then they can't go to school because they can't afford to get a college education. If you can't afford to get a college education, then you're never going to move up and make good money in the world, and then that cycle of poverty starts to repeat itself. Same thing happens with women. Women can't go out and get a master's degree or a PhD if they're busy raising kids. And so by providing childcare, that's at least one way to try to sort of even out this disparity between men and women. Now, much like the civil rights movement used court cases and litigation in order to make their point, we see the same thing happening with the women's rights movement. So the Higher Education Act of 1972 will have a number of things that will improve conditions in schools, particularly colleges and universities. And one big part of the Higher Education Act of 1972, probably the most famous part, is what is called Title IX. Title IX is all about civil rights for everybody within colleges and universities, but a big part of Title IX specifically focuses on women. And so what Title IX says is that any program at the high school level, at the middle school level, elementary school, or college level that receives federal funding, that receives money from the government, must spend an equal amount of money on both men and women's programs. You cannot have gender discrimination in any type of public school or public education in this country. What that means is that if you're going to spend $100,000 on men's football, you need to spend $100,000 on women's sports at a college or university. If you're going to build a new basketball arena for men, you've got to build equal facilities for women. So what this tries to do is bridge the gender gap. And in the 70s, a lot of women weren't even allowed to participate in college athletics. So this is giving women a chance.
So, like, I know, like, a lot of, like, colleges, they'll put, like, a ton more money into football because it brings in more money. So, are they saying, like, they have to put the same amount of money into other, like, sports that, because I know, like, people want to, like, since football usually brings in the most money at the university, like, they have to still spend the most money, or, like, the same amount of money on equipment stuff.
Where the differences usually come in and why football costs so much more money is paying the coaches. Like, you don't have to spend more money on paying the coaches. But if you're going to build a new football stadium, you need to spend an equal amount of money building some type of facility that women can use, or allow a women's sport to use that facility as well. So like U of M, well, most basketball is easy, right? So you build a basketball court, men and women play on the same court. Where it gets a little bit trickier is for some of the sports where you need different facilities. There's not a women's football team, right? So you've got to come up with other sports to offset the cost of what you're going to spend on football. So part of it is cheerleading. I know when I was going to Eastern Michigan, they never had a women's rowing team, and then they formed a rowing team, simply put to try to offset the cost of the football team. A lot of schools have volleyball, sort of offset the cost of men's football. So usually it means most universities have more women's sports than men's sports. simply put, because they're trying to offset the cost of the men's sports, which tend to spend a lot more money.
Soccer can be one.
Yeah.
My sister plays soccer. She uses all the same facilities.
Yeah. Soccer, baseball, softball generally use the same facilities. Swimming, obviously. Most sports usually do use the same stuff, but if you're going to do something like football where it's just men, you let like women's lacrosse play there, you let women's soccer play there if you don't have a dedicated soccer field, or what you do is you form a women's sport and you spend money on that. So like a lot of universities have field hockey and rowing, which are two generally considered female sports. Not to say that men couldn't play those sports, but good question. Cricket is generally not a huge sport here in the United States. Before you think that this is just some kind of far off foreign concept, Title IX actually affected our school district. Yeah, a few years ago.
I hated
A few years ago, the Plymouth baseball team did a lot of fundraising. Then went out and they raised a lot of money to buy new bleachers for the baseball field. Now at our school, baseball and softball play on different fields. So this is what they did. They put in very nice bleachers, individual seats, nice big concrete base, but they didn't do that at the softball field. And then it became a major deal. This was what the softball field looked like. This is what the baseball field looked like. You have to have equal facilities for men and women, and so somebody sued over Title IX, and the options you have are either you upgrade the softball facility, or you got to take the baseball stuff down. They didn't have enough money to upgrade the softball facility, and so I think all the stuff is still in storage, isn't it? Or did they put it up on the baseball field? I haven't been out there in a while.
No, they took it. What do you mean, like put it up?
Well, they took it down, right? They had to take
Yeah,
all the stuff down.
I think they just tossed it.
So, yeah. Yeah, this was, I want to say 3, 4, or 5 years ago, something like that.
No, it was like 5 years ago. Because my brother was.
That's why I said 3, 4, 5, I don't know, a while ago.
Wait, but if they funded that themselves by spot or like by fundraising,
Mhm.
then they're not getting money from the government. So why did they?
But they do get some money from the government. And so since the teams get money from the government, got to spend equally. Equal facilities. I am not a Title IX lawyer. Clearly, the judge disagreed. I mean, that would make sense. Personally, like, I mean, softball stuff, go out and fundraise it, but just like other sports, right? I mean, so Canton generally has, I think, probably the nicest baseball fields of the three. Canton's baseball fields and softball fields are probably a little bit nicer. But both the baseball and softball teams go out and pay for all that on their own. I don't know. Anyways, sports, crazy deal. Another famous Supreme Court case, this was one of the Warren Court cases, right? Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade said that women abortion is legal. Prior to the case of Roe versus Wade, abortion was illegal in many states, which made it tricky because women who wanted to have an abortion had to do one of two things: either pay a doctor to do it illegally, and sometimes it's been shady doctors in very shady situations. There are some pretty nasty things you can do to have an abortion without going to a doctor that are very unsafe and very dangerous, and I'm not even going to describe them to you because I don't want y'all to get sick, but pretty nasty stuff. Or the other option that you had is to go to a different state where an abortion is legal. Unfortunately, if you don't live close to a state where abortion is legal, that would make it a very difficult situation for women to have access. And so in the Supreme Court case Roe versus Wade, the court ruled that a woman has the right to privacy, and what she does with the doctor with her own body is her own business. To this day, this is one of the most debated Supreme Court cases out there. It's one that a lot of people, especially religious groups, want to change. But honestly, I don't foresee it changing anytime soon because you would need a constitutional amendment to do so. So, like it, dislike it, it's probably not going to change. Another big thing in the 70s was the push for what it was called the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment's goal was to literally put it in the Constitution, to have an amendment to the Constitution that said men and women would be equal. Technically, we've got the 14th Amendment, which is the Equal Protection Clause, but there's not a straight-up amendment saying that men and women are equal in this country. And so there was a big push in the 1970s to actually pass an amendment that said men and women would be equal. Did the Equal Rights Amendment pass? No. There were a lot of people opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. It originally passed Congress, but in order to become an official amendment, it doesn't have to be just passed by Congress. It then has to be approved by 3/4 of the states. And when it went to ratifying, 3/4 of the states did not ratify. Mostly the South and mostly the West without the West Coast. Mostly were the states that didn't go for the Equal Rights Amendment. There were, I wouldn't say, but I guess it would be a surprising number of women who were opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. These people who wanted the Equal Rights Amendment wanted a lot of change. Of course, we've got conservatives who want the status quo. And as much as there were women who wanted equality, there were a lot of women who were fearful of what the Equal Rights Amendment might mean for them. They were fearful that if women had too many rights, then some of the things that women traditionally wanted to do, like stay home and take care of a family, not every woman wanted to do that, but the women who do want to do that, they're going to feel some pressure to maybe go out and work and get a job. And so this begins what we would call the formation of the new right. So on Friday, we looked at the new left. Now we're going to look at the new right. And so if we look at the right-hand side of the political continuum, people who want the status quo or people who want to go back to the good old days. And so the new right begins with a movement called the pro-family movement. The idea that we need to start asserting more traditional family values. The idea that men would go off and get a job, women would stay home and raise the kids, let's all sit together and eat dinner. I mean, going back to sort of the good old days. We want to look at, quote unquote, the glory days of the 40s and the 50s when families used to bond and spend time together. This is really what the pro-family movement is all about. Excuse me, it's all about spending time with your family, spending time with your loved ones. And again, they were probably the biggest group that opposed the Equal Rights Amendment. People like Phyllis Schlafly said that this is just going to destroy the social order in our country. This is going to destroy the system we have where women can stay home and take care of their kids and not have to worry about things like getting a job. That she viewed the idea of taking care of kids as a privilege. She looked at the idea, and many women agreed with her, that the Equal Rights Amendment would take away some of the traditional characteristics of what it means to be a woman, and not everybody wanted that change. Not everybody wanted to rush off and get a job and move out of the home. And so she said, Equal Rights Amendment means abortion funding, means homosexual privileges, means whatever else. She was not a fan of the Equal Rights Amendment, and so her and many others opposed the Equal Rights Amendment. There's also a little bit more of a practical point of view from the Equal Rights Amendment. By the 1970s, we're fighting the Vietnam War, and many men, literally roughly 1 million men, are going to get drafted into the war to go fight the Vietnam War. And women are fearful that if we truly have equal rights, then women would be drafted into the military as well. There's also a fear at the time that gay marriage might be legalized. It's legal today. Nobody's losing any sleep over it today. But big deal and people were pretty worked up about it. And they thought that giving equal rights to women would eventually lead to equal rights for homosexuals. And if that happens, the world will come to an end. It didn't. Life is good. But that was still something that people were upset about. And many women just like the idea of men being responsible for providing for the family. There were many women who were perfectly okay with being stay-at-home moms.